I've been hearing a common theme, both this morning with Evan Williams and the reports coming out of the Berkeley Tech Summit in Mountain View. And that theme is that we are drowning in data. So our mission today is to help journalists throw out a lifeline to their audiences, to help them make sense of that flood of information, ironically by how to find more information, but more importantly by making it smarter, using it smarter and leveraging it more, making more effective use of that information. To do that, we have three of the best here. We have Bill Alison. He came to the Sunlight Foundation from the Center for Public Integrity. It was a natural segue for him, but Sunlight has several websites that their mission is to dig out information so the public can follow what's being done or not being done with their money. We also have Denise Wagner. She's chair of the journalism department at SF State. She spent more than a decade as a reporter for both the Examiner and the Chronicle here in San Francisco. Her primary topics were education and covering issues in the black community. Knowing that data drives public policy, her focus is on using data to discover structural inequities so that, in fact, data can drive public policy more better. Then we have Aaron Pilhofer, editor of Interactive Newsroom Technologies at the New York Times. Besides being a tennis geek, I'm told, and having a first name that probably is spelled more incorrectly more often than my last name, he's a pioneer in taking advantage of missed opportunities to use data in ways that add value for the reader and the company. This graphic, by the way, on Super Tuesday, marked a milestone for the Times. It's the first time that the highest traffic page on the website was not a story. It was this graphic. He's also a winner, you may have heard, of a Night News Challenge grant last year to make the DocumentCloud, and he will be talking about that as well. All of these PowerPoints and handouts will be on the website, the ONA website, shortly after our session. Bill will kick us off, and afterwards we'll have questions. So, Bill.
Thank you, Deborah. Okay. Hi, I'm Bill Allison of the Sunlight Foundation.
Can you hear him back in the back?
And yeah, is everybody able to hear? No?
Yeah,
okay.
really loud.
Can I just move this up a little bit? Okay, that's a little better.
Take it out maybe if you want.
Take it out? No, I'm not going to do that. Maybe I will. Let's see if I can do that. Okay. Oh, no, it's... Okay. Thank you. Okay, without further ado. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about where we are with data, and as Deborah said, we're kind of inundated with it. It's coming from all kinds of sources and all kinds of places, particularly from the federal government. I kind of wanted to start with a picture of these two guys, Bartlett and Steele. I used to work for them at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they kind of felt that, you know, government data was the gold standard of information. They much preferred to do their own analysis of government data rather than to rely on like nonprofits or other groups or so they went to a tremendous amount of effort to collect government data from all sorts of sources. A lot of it, as you can see, on paper. There's still a tremendous amount of government data that's on paper. We just did a big project taking Foreign Agent Registration Act filings, which are these ugly sets of data, and turning them into data, having people input them. But there's more and more government data that's machine readable, and as the data becomes more machine readable, it's easier to manipulate, and easier to work with, and more available, although lots of it is still unavailable. One of the big projects that we're working on now at Sunlight is something called the Secret Data Catalog, which is looking at sources of government, sources of government data that's collected electronically but is not disseminated to the public or made available to the public. The good news as to where we are now, states and federal government seem to be getting the internet a lot better. There's more and more states and the federal government putting more and more information online. We had the Coburn-Obama bill in 2006, which was created usaspending.gov, which started putting federal contracting data online and grant data online in a searchable, sortable, downloadable format. I think that's like sort of the first bill that actually specified creating a website. Talk louder, okay. I'm sorry if people have been having trouble. The other thing, so there's a strong presumption towards online data. And one of the things that, working in Washington, and I don't think we're the only nonprofit group in this situation. Since the Obama administration has come in, we do get contacted from time to time from people in the administration saying that, we'd like to get this data online, we'd like your advice on how to do this, we'd like your ideas for what else could be online. So there's a very different culture in Washington as opposed to what it was under the Bush administration, where a lot of things just kind of disappeared. And, we're seeing more and more kinds of things that are coming up as data. This is a pre-Obama thing, but this is a lobbying report. On the left is what it used to look like. Now this is all available as XML data. You can actually search these fields. Prior to this, you used to have to page through these things one by one, reading inestimably long passages looking for the kind of data that you were interested in. Now you can kind of search it. It's really ugly data, hard to find, but it's available. And one other thing I should mention, by the way, recovery.gov, here you have a federal law that's spending $787 billion. The primary mechanism to ensure that it's not wasted is an online website, which the public is supposed to use and reporters are supposed to be able to find out information from. That's a real kind of sea change. And we also have data.gov, which is kind of a one-stop shopping repository for all kinds of information, everything from, you can get access from this one portal, everything from Federal Bureau of Investigation crime statistics to the World Spider Catalog is the one that was fascinating the offices, geodata coded with spiders around the world. So all kinds of things you can get there. But I think, one of the big questions that I have about a lot of this information as the government is putting more and more stuff online is how good is the data? And I think this is what kind of creates both opportunities and pitfalls for reporters. Here's something, this is an entry from usaspending.gov. This is a website that the federal government puts out that tracks grants and contracts and federal spending. And we came across this, and it's one of my colleagues at a project called Subsidy Scope, which tracks all federal subsidies in the federal economy. It's a huge project that we're doing with Pew Charitable Trust. And here you have a company, Dynamic Research, and it looks like they're getting from the entry on usaspending.gov, this is still there today, when I accessed it this morning, it looks like they're getting a $333 million contract. Now, if you actually call the company up, it's a $1 million contract, or sorry, grant. It's not a contract, it's a grant. It's a $1 million grant. And then when they started going through it, the program is wrong, the description of what they got the money for is inaccurate, and just about everything about this entry is inaccurate. And it's not just this one thing. Everybody can find the one needle in the haystack. Well, when you start going through this data on usaspending.gov, which I want to spend a little bit of time on because it's been out there longer, half of Amtrak's 2008 spending is missing. There's $660 million, which we know that Amtrak got, which we know that they spent on grants and contracts, and it's just not there. It's just missing. There are some programs, a lot of USDA rural programs that report no spending at all, even though we know that they're getting money. There's GAO has taken a look at some of this, and they find that 25% under or over report what they're spending, 22% report nothing at all. And so when you start running into holes like this, and you start wondering, how much can I rely on any of these numbers that are being put out? And then the last thing is, is there Potemkin data? Because when the government is putting out information, I think it's always wise to be a little bit skeptical. This chart is from, the one on the left is usaspending.gov. The one on the right is from a nonprofit that we support called OMB Watch that has their own site, fedspending.org, which tracks the same information that's on usaspending.gov. The chart on the left shows Defense Intelligence Agency contracts. This is the organization that got ramped up after September 11th, that Donald Rumsfeld was running a lot of his, or getting in a lot of his information. The Pentagon created its kind of, own CIA, although they'd always had it, but they spent a lot more. Well, these are obviously inaccurate numbers, but what it's showing is nothing in 2001, nothing 2002, and so on. The 2005 figure on usaspending.gov right now, that's about, I think it's $414,000 is the total. And as you see on USA Spending, they're talking $461 million, $541 million in contracts. The discrepancy and why this exists, I mean, there is a reason for this. The Defense Intelligence Agency did not want to be covered by usaspending.gov, and they basically scrubbed the site of all of their contracts that were on there. They're all gone now, but it's preserved on fedspending.org. So I think as you're getting this information, you really have to be careful about what it's telling you, and look into the numbers, and bear in mind that they change a lot in the course of being put out there. Some data can be real, and I think we cut a word off there, but can be really, really misleading. A case in point is the estimated jobs created or saved that is going to be coming from recovery.gov. Nobody actually knows what a saved job is. On October 15th, when they start reporting recipient data, though, all this information will be up there. And the administration is going to crow that we created these many jobs, we saved these many jobs. Obviously, I mean, this is why they're counting them, this is why states are putting all these numbers, sending all these numbers to them. But if you make a phone call, ProPublica checked some of the job numbers that New Hampshire was putting out, and there was wide discrepancies. You have a claim that one company had 620 jobs created by state transportation spending, and the company employed only 450 people in New Hampshire. So these are the kinds of things that you can find when you start with a number and question it. And they just had double and triple counting of employees because they would have multiple employees working, or the same employee working on 3 or 4 different jobs. So I guess, just to close, as this data is becoming more available, don't just be a stenographer, as David Burnham says, great reporter for the New York Times. The real story itself can be the data, and if you think about it, this is information the government is relying on to track spending, to follow how programs are working, to assess what's going on, and a lot of times they're flying blind or pretty close to blind, and you can only get this by looking at the numbers. So as this data becomes available, I think there's tremendous opportunities for reporters to really get a sense of how government works, but at the same time, it doesn't save you, it's more shoe leather reporting rather than less, because you have to spend a lot of time talking to data guys and finding out exactly what's going on. So.
You're a bunch of nice people. How is the sound in the back of the room? Are you hearing things okay? Fine. I think I'm going to use this one, yeah.
I'm short enough, so I shouldn't have a problem here. So I want to talk not so much about the data. Oh, there we go. But I really want to focus more on how you think about the data. So this is really more of a conceptual discussion. I think most often when we're looking at data, we're looking for trends, and many of the trends that we find out there often lead to one particular bad actor, some person getting in the way and creating some type of social or inequity. What I'd like us to think about is how policy actually leads to inequity. So you can think of policy in many different ways. Public policy, sometimes they're organizational and institutional systems, economic, societal systems that breed problems with inequity, socially, economically, health and educationally. So some sample investigative results you might find. Health mortality rates for African American men. 1.3 times the rate of white men, 2.4 times the rate of Asian Pacific Islander men. And what we find here is that the main causes of death for African American men are homicide, HIV/AIDS, colon and prostate cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. Education, you can look at it, the dropout rate. Among Latino students, 3 times higher than white students, 6 times higher than Asian students. And crime, I mean, I think most people are familiar with the issue of crime, and what we see is that poor and minority neighborhoods have as much as 2 times the rate of crime, especially violent crime, than affluent neighborhoods. So these type of results are great to find because they do show inequities, but I'd like to take it a little bit deeper. How do we make the connection between policy and these actual results? Because I think what often happens is we see these numbers and we say, yes, these inequities exist, but sometimes we're looking at particular groups. It's easy to blame the groups or in some way stigmatize the victims of these numbers. And even when individuals may be making decisions that lead to some of these outcomes, they're not making decisions in a vacuum. They are making decisions around choices that they're given, and those choices are often dictated by policy, public policy. So where do we start? I wanted to just use this example of education as a start. Some of the measures of success in education generally are standardized test scores, high school graduation rates, college admission, college graduation, and vocational certificates that lead to living wage jobs. And often these outcomes are looked at through the prism of race, gender, geography, class. But if we take it a little deeper, you have to ask yourself the question, what are the factors that influence success in school? Funding would be one example. Of course, wealthier districts can afford to buy really nice computers and that kind of thing, whereas poorer districts cannot. But how is it that it's determined that poorer districts get less money than wealthy districts? A lot of this is dictated by tax policy. Resources in school, again, connected to funding. So we're talking about access to advanced placement courses, access to the internet. You may have computers, but you may not have the internet. You may not have high-speed internet, for example. Neighborhood stability. Now, this is a really interesting indicator. And I just want to diverge for a moment and talk a little bit about scholar William Julius Wilson, who came out of the University of Chicago and went to Harvard. And he is a sociologist who did a lot of research around neighborhood instability and neighborhood disadvantage. And what he did was he developed a disadvantage index that allowed scholars to track crime rates. So he found this connection between disadvantage and high crime rates. So if your community was disadvantaged, generally you would have high crime rates. Well, if you break down the index, you're looking at things like housing vacancies, residential turnaround, underemployment, unemployment, educational levels. All of these are really important indicators. And so I think this index is important for journalists because you can actually trace the disadvantage through specific indicators. Nutrition. Of course, a lot of people know that if kids are going to school hungry, they're not going to do well in school. But you can even be a little bit more specific. If kids are not getting healthy vegetables, if they're not eating right, if they're going to school eating chips or eating high sugar foods, then of course they're not going to do well in school. So the question here is, what kind of access do students have to fresh vegetables, to grocery stores in their neighborhood? Family stability, also an issue in terms of success in school. Educational levels of the parents, and then disciplinary action. There's some emerging research that shows that Latino and African American students often receive harsher disciplinary action for the same offenses that white students may receive. So again, looking again at the policy. So how do you use this data? You collect your data, but you have to ask yourself questions. That is, how does the public policy influence these outcomes? How do institutional systems influence these outcomes? When I'm talking about institutional systems, I'm really thinking of maybe bureaucratic practices that could influence maybe access to parents in the schools, that kind of thing. Economic systems, I think that's clear. And then societal structures. So what we mean by societal structures are actually de facto structures that may exist and influence other things. So neighborhoods tend to be segregated, which means that schools will be segregated. So segregated neighborhoods lead to segregated schools. I wanted to point out a couple of examples here of some really good stories that looked at not just the patterns, but also led to policy. This is a New York Times piece. What's that? Oh. Sorry. There you go. Dinner.
Has anybody been to that restaurant? Is it good? Okay, good.
So this is a piece that Manny Fernandez did looking at disparities in mortgage rates. And he started out by looking at research that some researchers did at New York University. And what they found was that minority communities tended to be targets for subprime loans. So versus white communities which did not get targeted so much for loans. What's really cool about this story, other than the actual data research that they did, was they also created a map. It may take a little bit of time because it's a big file. Sorry. But it's coming up. So what the map does is it actually let's zoom in on Brooklyn here. And so if you click on the darker areas, these are the areas that tended to be primarily minority and primarily subprime mortgage targets. So what's really cool about this is it's a visual that allows people to actually see how the inequity exists. One of the difficulties with a story like this is actually tying it directly to a policy. I think the pattern is so evident here. It even instigated some investigation within New York about practices, loaning practices. So. This American Life, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this program. It's one of my favorites. Did a great story explaining the economic crisis. And they start out by making a connection between two people. One person involved in creating the collateralized debt obligations, the CDOs, and the other person on the other end of this chain who actually took out one of these loans and was pretty much hit hard. I just want to play just a couple of minutes of the beginning of this just so you can get a sense. It's a pretty dramatic story. Is this plugged? Is the sound plugged in? It might be taking too long, so should we skip it?
So Adam, where are we?
I recorded this at the Ritz-Carlton in Lower Manhattan. It's a black tie dinner. It was just a few weeks ago.
And you, by the way, are NPR's international business and economics correspondent?
That's right. I was there for my job. They're giving out awards for all these financial securities, including the one that nearly brought down the global financial system, you know, in the whole subprime mortgage crisis.
At this time, I'd like to ask all of our stars to please assemble over here on the left side of the stage.
This guy is a legend. He's a granddaddy of our industry.
I'm sitting at this dinner with Jim Finkel. He's kind of nervous because he's up for CDO of the Year for the CDO he created, Monterey. Now, the CDO, that's what we're talking about. That's the financial instrument that was central to this global credit crisis we're in.
And wait, and they gave awards for this? These guys are giving each other awards for doing that?
Well, let me just say, they were aware that there's a certain irony giving awards to the instrument that almost destroyed the world economy, and they did consider canceling this year, but it's been a really tough year. It's been really gloomy for them.
Honestly, I know this sounds, I was really happy to see there were no major suicides, people weren't jumping off bridges, there weren't a lot of personal disasters.
Now, that same week, a few days earlier, across the river in Brooklyn, I went to a completely different kind of gathering. It was not black tie. It was put on by the Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America. It was people on the opposite side of the mortgage crisis, people facing foreclosure, trying to figure out how to keep their homes. I met this one guy, Richard. He's a Marine. He's this big guy, over 6 feet tall, and when he came back from Iraq a few years ago, he bought one of these fancy new mortgages with an adjustable rate. Recently, his rate reset. It's gone up by more than $2,000 a month, and he's fallen behind on his payments.
It got to the point where, at one point, my son had $7,000 in a CD, and I had to break it. And I mean, that really hurt, because I was saving that money for his college. I mean, I put $2,000 back, but it's like you can't have a future. They put you in a situation where, after a while, you're gonna fail.
Okay, so you get a sense that they not only show you the drama of this particular issue, but what's great explanatory journalism in this example is they really go through each link of the chain that connects these two people, and they explain each link. And I know this seems like, okay, where's the data? But if you're thinking about data in broad terms, which I am in this example, you're really thinking about ways of explaining big issues in small incremental ways for people. That's how basically I'm seeing it. The final story I'll talk about is a piece by the Chicago Reporter. They are a magazine out of Chicago which focuses on poverty and race issues. And this piece essentially looks at disparities in tax policies. So what they did was they were basically looking at funding for several school districts in Illinois, and they pulled the tax records from each county, and they tracked basically how each county was drawing money or drawing revenue. They found that poor school districts were actually setting higher tax rates than wealthier districts. And what this meant was it was creating sort of a cycle of low funding. Of course, they had to raise the tax rates higher than other neighboring school districts because they generally had property rates that were, or property values that were lower. They generally did not have commercial businesses, and because they had the higher tax rates, they could not attract the commercial businesses there to their city. And so essentially it was creating this cycle of low funding. So again, a really important story using data to show tax policies and how it actually affected, in this case, school outcomes. I'll end it there.
Hi, I'm Aaron Pilhofer. I am editor of interactive news technologies at the New York Times, and but I'm not here to talk about my day job today. I'm here to talk about my hobby, which is DocumentCloud. And DocumentCloud, for those of you who don't know, is an organization that was funded. We were a Night News Challenge grant winner for this year, the last round, and it's a joint project between myself and two folks from ProPublica, Eric Umansky and Scott Klein. And the genesis of the project really actually was just trying to answer a problem that we all have, which is how do you present, share, search, find, deal with these mounds and mounds and mounds of documents that investigative journalists, reporters, watchdogs, academics have to deal with on a regular basis. So that's how the project got started, and this is why I'm here today, because documents in the context of this conversation are data. It's funny because I come from the computer-assisted reporting world, and one of our mantras is data is documents. And so here I am to tell you the exact opposite is also true. And I want you to think about documents in the context of data, because documents themselves, as unstructured text, are fairly difficult to mine. But once you start putting structure around documents, they become very, very powerful. And let me show you a little bit what we're talking about. This is the document reader. This is a piece of software that we developed at the New York Times. It's going to be open source at some point in the very near future. And this is actually what started the conversation about DocumentCloud. And you can start to see here how we're trying to sort of take an unstructured piece of text and build sort of metadata around it. In this case, on the right side, you can see we've created a navigational scheme. And then all the links underneath there are annotations. And this up here that you're seeing is an annotation. This is written by a reporter. Well, actually, it's fake text, so this is a mock-up. But in this case, it would be giving you a little additional information about the document. So that's metadata that we can take and apply to a document. But DocumentCloud, we want to take it beyond that. We want to turn unstructured text into structured data. It's pretty much that simple. That's the entire point of the project. There's basically 4 components to it. DocumentCloud itself will be an analytical tool. It'll be a place where reporters, watchdogs, et cetera, can put their documents into sort of a workspace and sort of work with them as they're reporting out a story. It'll be a processing tool. So if you have documents that are just images and you want to OCR them and make them searchable, you'll be able to do that. It's a publishing tool, meaning that we will make it available and make it put those documents in a format that'll make it easy for you to put them online. And ultimately, it's a search tool and a catalog. It'll be a sort of a massive data store of documents that we make available publicly. I'll show you that transition again, because I think that's pretty cool. Nice, right? I like Keynote. The goals of DocumentCloud are pretty simple. We want to improve transparency. The same sort of things that Bill was talking about in the context of government data. And we're not just talking about, in this case, government transparency. We're talking about journalistic transparency, showing readers exactly how we're concluding what we're concluding, and pointing to the exact spot in a document where we found this data. And further, we want to contribute to the linked data community. That's part of this I won't really talk about right now. But as reporters and editors who have a vested interest in making sure that every reference in a document is accurate, a reference to a person, a place, a company is accurate, I think we as journalists have a lot to contribute to this growing world of linked data. And most importantly, it's going to be 100% free to reporters, watchdogs, the public, as long as you're willing at some point to make your documents public. So where are we now? This is an example of how we news organizations typically publish documents online. This is a great story from Walt Bogdanich. Just a bunch of PDFs, links to PDFs. Terrible user experience. So once you download those PDFs, you'll find out that, oh my God, they're not even searchable. This is a terrible way of putting documents online. And that's where the document reader came in. But we want to do more than just present documents. We want to make them something that people can actually dig into and find connections. And part of the impetus for this is a piece of software we use at times called FAST. And we have access to this because at one point it drove site search. This is an excruciatingly expensive piece of software. We have a corporate contract, so we're able to get an instance of FAST in the newsroom. But what's interesting here isn't what you're seeing in the middle, which is just sort of like a Google-style search. What's interesting is what you're seeing on the right side. Do you see that? Companies, locations, underneath that, what you can't see, people, places. Behind the scenes, as you put a set of documents into FAST, it'll crawl through it and pull these, what we call entities out, and make them searchable, and so you can drill down into documents and start making connections that you couldn't otherwise make. Unfortunately, FAST is a 6-figure commitment for a newsroom, which is why we love OpenCalais. If you don't know what OpenCalais is an API. It's an interface into a piece of software that was developed by a company called ClearForest, which Thomson Reuters recently bought, and wrote an open API around it. And you can take your documents and you can put it through OpenCalais and get back all of this incredible metadata. And this is sort of how it works. It'll take any sort of format, text, HTML, XML, It does its magic, that's the orange part. And then outcome named entities like people, companies, organizations, facts, business terms, events. And if that's a little wonky for you, this is a better schematic. Your documents go in and magic comes out. That's all you really need to know. So let me give you a sort of practical example of how something like this might work. So let's say you're a reporter and you have a pile of documents, or you know there's a pile of documents somewhere out there that reference IBM and some facility that IBM has around Paris, France, and you want to sort of narrow that down and find those documents. Well, you might log on to Google and do something like this, IBM near Paris, where file type is PDF, assuming that it's probably online as a PDF, and you'll get back gobbledygook. You'll get back very little of actual value. And that, my friends, is a blunt instrument indeed. What you really want to be able to do is more of a search like this, where you say something like, find all documents that unambiguously reference the company IBM and a place within 50 miles of Paris, France. Well, you really can't do that on Google, but you will be able to do something like that on DocumentCloud. So this is what we're building. We're building a system where you'll be able to upload documents, or media will be, watchdogs and other members of DocumentCloud will be able to upload the documents. We'll do some processing in the background, and basically we're building a layer on top of OpenCalais. That's what DocumentCloud really is. And then at the end of this, you'll be able to find those links. So as you see in this sort of schematic, here are those 3 documents where IBM, unambiguously within 50 miles of Paris, France. And you can make those connections in ways that you really couldn't before. And then, because this is essentially a piece of social software, if other organizations have committed documents that also apply directly to what you're doing, you can make that connection as well. And those 4 organizations are all members right now of DocumentCloud, or will be when we're actually live. The Calais system does a lot of really fantastic things. It pulls out people. So you can see here's an example where it found Obama and identified Obama as a person. Organizations, also very handy. Country, in this case, this is a really good example, because here, this could be Georgia the state or Georgia the country. And if you'll notice, the only reason it was able to determine that it was Georgia the country is because of the context. Here you see a lot of references to Russia, so then Calais is smart enough to know, okay, this is probably Georgia the country. And then city and state. And the cool thing here is not only do you get back a latitude, longitude, so you can map these things, you also get a container, so you know what the higher level unit is. So you know that Washington, D.C. is a city inside the United States, or inside a state, if it were a state. Very cool. So we call this entity extraction and disambiguation, which has become my new favorite word. But the bottom line is this stuff is really pretty magical. And when we're all done with this, we're hoping that what we will end up with is a tool that will help journalists a lot to do this kind of thing. The secret here, as I said, is disambiguation. Because anyone who's ever worked with data before, done campaign finance analysis, things like that, knows how many different ways you as a reader will see things like IBM, International Business Machines, I period, B period, M period. Human beings can recognize those all and say, oh, that's IBM, the company. But machines, they look at that and they would say, those are 3 completely different things. That's why it's so hard to do those campaign finance analyses that we do. Calais, anytime it can recognize an entity and say, oh, okay, we think this is IBM, the company, what it will see is what you see on the left there. It's an unambiguous URI. That is an ID. That's a nameplate. It's essentially a social security number that would always refer within the Calais system to IBM, the company. So not just within your document, but within any document in Calais. So what you have there is the ability to completely link up documents that would otherwise be impossible to link. And then I mentioned linked data earlier. Through this linked data universe that's sort of burgeoning right now, you're able to get to additional data. Once you know, okay, this is IBM, that's their social security number, you're able to go to places like DBpedia and get all this other information about IBM, the company, board members, the stock ticker, the SIC codes, etc. It becomes a very powerful sort of distributed database that you're able to access once you've been able to identify those unique entities. Same is true of places. Here we have Paris, France. We see Paris, we see references to France in a piece of text, and we as human beings can can figure out, oh, that probably means Paris, France. A machine would just see Paris. That could be Paris, Texas. It could be Paris, South Carolina. It could be Paris, Wisconsin. It could be any of those. But Calais is able to figure out an unambiguous reference to Paris, France, where it is able to do that. We've got 27 members right now who have sort of signed on as sort of beta testers, and we're looking for more, of course. So if you have an interest in DocumentCloud, this is the email to send, or you can talk to myself or Scott or Eric, who are sitting down there. If you want to raise your hands up maybe a little higher so people can actually see you. There you go. We're going to be floating around for the rest of the weekend. And now, much to Scott's horror, I am going to actually demo a very early beta. Actually, it's not even a beta. This is an early alpha of what the workspace might look like. So just keep in mind, this is not in any way, shape, or form finished software. This is just giving you a sort of a flavor of what you might be able to do. So here you can see we're going to have a system of, obviously, we're going to have accounts that we're going to have collections of documents that you'll be able to manage that belong to you. This might be a sort of a private workspace that once you've loaded your documents in here, you can sort of manipulate them. Maybe you have a document collection for a specific story. Here's where you would work with it. At this stage, your documents wouldn't be public. You would then be able to make them public, but that'll always be an opt-in option for you. So what's working now is this. You can upload a document and get it processed. I'm not going to do that because it takes a little while. So once your document is into OpenCalais, into DocumentCloud, you can do a simple search. So let's say I'm trying to find information. I have a collection of documents, and I'm trying to find information about a scandal. So I'm going to assume that the city here is Washington. Right, because that's, well, wait a minute. I'm also going to spell it right. Washington. Okay. So I'm going to do a faceted search. So already you can see, but just by putting city : up here and Washington, I'm doing a faceted search on just the city metadata that we're able to pull out of these documents. And this is, pretty cool, but this is the really cool part. You can see all the entities that the documents here, this is my result, these are the entities that OpenCalais was able to find that are of relevance to these documents. So now I'm saying, okay, so I know I've narrowed it down, I know I'm looking for a scandal, and I'm trying to remember what it's about, but oh gosh, certainly it's related to ethics, right? I know that, so I'm going to look down here under terms, and okay, here I'm going to find ethics law, so I'm going to pop that up, and I'm going to narrow it down a little bit more. And it's going to think a lot. There it is. And then, okay, so one document pops up, and then I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to say, yay, this is what I was looking for. And here's a story about John Ensign. Okay? So that just gives you sort of a very basic idea of what the system is going to do for you. And here you'll find if you just wanted to add John Ensign, you could do that. The idea, as you can see then, is to take all this unstructured text and turn it into structured data. So that's it. Thanks.
So the PowerPoints and handouts that Venice and Bill brought will be on the website. But for now, questions. There's a mic there. Please go to the mics. Tell us who you are. And should be a microphone right there on that stand. Yay. Okay.
Hi, my name's Alex Alkever. I work for AOL's new Daily Finance channel, which is dailyfinance.com. This is directed at Aaron because I have some interest in some of the search stuff myself, and I was curious why or if you feel comfortable going with Calais since it is private versus something like Lucene or Solar on the open source side for the search and secret sauce.
We are actually going to use Solar probably for the full text searching, but that's not what Solar doesn't do entity extraction. If you know of an open source entity extraction software that's in any way, shape, or form as good as what Calais provides, I would most definitely love to talk to you afterwards. But all that said, Calais is really pretty spectacular piece of software, and what they can do with unstructured text is pretty much unsurpassed anywhere else. So, no, I mean we're not uncomfortable at all. And furthermore, Calla really likes the Thomson Reuters really likes what we're doing on this project. So they're working with us very closely on it.
Same. The next question's for Aaron too. So updating or uploading documents. Will it? Do you have to scan it, or will you be able to take photos? How are you going to be able to upload? I mean, could it be to the point where you take a picture with your mobile phone and have it go up like that, so you can be like a spy or something? Or?
Yeah. One of the components of this is we are going to have some sort of OCR component to the processing portion of DocumentCloud. So if you have a TIFF or if you have a document that isn't OCR'd and doesn't have text associated with it, we will do OCR on it. What engine that is and how good that OCR ultimately is still sort of TK, because we haven't quite settled that part of it. But yes, we would be able to take what is essentially an image, like a scanned letter or something like that, upload it, we would OCR it, provide back searchable text. So yeah.
Any more questions? Really? Wow. This is amazing. If you really want to stay in your chair and shout really loudly, that'd be okay too. Really? Oh, okay, just yell, okay?
Also on DocumentCloud, are you looking at combining with some kind of tagging or all these other new softwares, or this is down the line, so that you can, get those documents easy with another search engine or
the format that everything that we do, I probably should have mentioned this, every piece of software we develop is going to be open source. The standard, the packaging, the XML standard we put together to describe a document, that format is going to be open is going to be an open standard. So if you wanted to develop some way of doing something with it once it's been processed, absolutely, that's totally cool. Calla does actually have a new sort of facet to it where it applies what they describe as social tags to it, and we will have that as part of the metadata. And we will, of course, because journalists are going to want to be able to tag documents when they're working with them in that workspace, we will have the ability for them to tag those documents locally, annotate them, pull chunks out, put them on a timeline, things like that. Whether that metadata ultimately gets or could be exported externally, that's sort of up in the air at this point. I think I think we could go either way with it. My sort of gut feeling is that that workspace kind of, having been a reporter for 15 years before going to the digital side, I think my gut feeling is that we probably want to keep those two sides pretty segregated and keep that workspace a fairly secure environment. But the short answer is yeah.
Hi, Sandeep Janarkar, City University of New York. I have a question for Aaron as well. English, of course, is the global language right now, but cities like New York City, huge Spanish-speaking populations, lots of documents. Is there a plan to bring other languages on board?
The limiting factor for us on that is what OpenCalais supports. And right now, Calais supports English, I think Spanish, French, and Arabic? Yeah. Arabic, yeah. Clear Forest used to do a lot of black budget work before Thomson Reuters bought it, so I don't know if those two things are related, but the limiting factor for us is that, and that's obviously an excruciatingly difficult problem to solve across multiple languages because context is always different. So we will support the languages that Calais supports, at least eventually. I think for now, I think we're going to try to keep the scope fairly limited, but eventually, yeah.
Hi, Jeff Walpole with Phase 2 Technology. Fortunately, another question for Aaron, so sorry everyone else. We do a lot of work with OpenCalais, so I have to ask a few things. The document, the software itself, the document viewer, I think you called it, or document viewer's Calais, but you said it was going to be open sourced. Do you have a time frame for that, and how would you envision a community helping you to support the software?
Well, actually, I can give you two very practical. Well, first I'll give you an answer to the first question. A matter of weeks. I was hopeful we would have it for this conference, since some of you might remember that I announced that we were going to do this at last year's conference. So it's, well, we didn't quite make that deadline. But we did a full rewrite of it. And we wanted to pull all the New York Times specific stuff out, and that actually took quite a bit longer than we thought it would. And the new version of it will support quite a few more features than the current version you'll find on nytimes.com. For example, it'll have an annotation list where you can see all the annotations that have been made all in one place. So that version, I will say, in a matter of weeks, in some form. It may be a very much a, we release it, but if you're going to use it, probably want to test it a little bit first, etc. The answer to the second question, what we hope is that the community of journalists who are going, or more and more sort of entering the digital world, or the folks in the digital world who are entering journalism, will embrace software like this and give back. And we've already talked. One of the reasons why this collaboration with ProPublica started was because of Document Viewer. That's the piece of software we were talking about when we started, going through this sort of what-if one-upsmanship in my boss's office, which eventually ended up being DocumentCloud. And so we will release this. There are features that I already know people are lining up to add to Document Viewer to give back. So I'm hopeful that will happen. We've already seen it happen with another piece of software that we've released through DocumentCloud. It's called CloudCrowd. It's the processing engine framework actually, that we wrote, that Jeremy, the lead developer, wrote to do parallel processing. And he described it as parallel processing for the rest of us. And I don't know if any of you have ever used like Hadoop or some of these other frameworks, but they're very, very complicated and have a very, very, very little documentation, and you have to be a real, uber nerd to figure them out. This one is designed purposefully to be much simpler, and we've already seen, God, I don't know, 3-4 patches committed. We've seen it's on GitHub right now if you want to go check it out. There's probably 250 followers, so we've already seen it happen with that piece of software. So my gut feeling is we will see it also with Document Viewer.
Hi, my name is Sarah Terry Cobo. I'm a freelance reporter and recent graduate of UC Berkeley Journalism School. Sorry, I came in a bit late, but I have a question for Aaron. I've done research on congressmen before on personal financial information based on info from opensecrets.org. But I was wondering, I've tried to use a service called PDF to Excel to analyze some of these really incredibly complex documents, but they were not able to convert these PDFs to Excel. I guess I'm interested in a really basic thing. Would it be able to create databases, for example, scan through and show, the majority of the tax receipts come from the oil and gas industry and the majority of the stock income comes from the real estate industry? If you had a PDF, for example, that said, Abercrombie & Fitch had Schedule A, and Schedule A is 30,000 to 50,000. That kind of really complicated information. That can be done by hand, but is time-consuming. Is that the kind of thing that DocumentCloud can do, or is it just finding other related information based on the search terms you find in these documents.
But having spent, I can't tell you how many hours of my previous life doing exactly what you described, I would love to sit here and say, yes, it will do that it will be a magic box that you could put stuff in and get that. But unfortunately, that probably is a little beyond what it's capable of at this stage. Maybe we can talk offline afterwards, because I've used a few pieces of software that might be helpful for you if that's still a problem.
Okay.
But that is a constant battle, unless the document itself has a table in it that is, and it's searchable. It's a true PDF. It's not just a scanned image. In that case, you might be able to. Now, maybe I am reversing myself here. Maybe you would be able to go through and find those. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's actually an interesting idea. Maybe we should look at that. You probably would be able to go through and detect, you know what, I think this is a table. Do you want to treat this as data rather than text? Interesting idea. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Just yell loudly.
I've got a question for Bill. The amount of data on data.gov right now is still pretty limited.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you might be able to give us a sense of, I don't know, rollout schedule, when we can expect this. I know you're not working there, obviously, but if you talk with them or have a sense of timetables for the administration.
Yeah, what they did first was the low-hanging fruit, and the stuff that was already, let me hope this is loud enough, that was already available and was already easy to get, and they did like a quick audit and pulled in that kind of stuff. As far as the schedule, I mean, I know that they're trying to get more up there, but I don't know how quickly, and I don't know. I really don't have a good sense even for how much resistance they're running into or how much but my feeling is that there's still most of the data that's available on government websites is still available on agency websites, and it hasn't been pulled into, and I don't know quite what the holdup is. I mean, one of the things that Sunlight is doing, Sunlight Labs that I mentioned before, they're creating something called the National Data Catalog, which is kind of going to mirror what data.gov does, but they're also going to try to pull in state and local data and bring everything in. And I think that they're going to try to have, well, I don't want to promise anything, but I think they're going to, I know that they're working on it and getting closer and closer to having something that they might be able to release, but I don't know when it's going to be, so I'm not promising a date at all. But as far as data.gov goes, yeah, I mean, it's a great effort, but it's just still not a lot there. And as I think I put somewhere, my team of 7 people, we have not used a single bit of data off of data.gov yet to write a story, so.
Okay, one in the back, and again, yell.
Was this to me?
I think all three of you.
At San Francisco State, we didn't have any intentions of doing anything like that, but you should know that we have a handout in the back that can guide people around stories, data-driven stories, and different databases they can access to help them put together strong stories that relate inequities to policy decisions.
And we have this tool called congregatecom that has, it basically tracks every member of Congress. It's got campaign finance information. And right now in the beta version, it's got 2,000 census data because they break that down by congressional district. We can't wait for the 2010 census data to be out, because then we'll be able to load that in. You'll be able to see things like, as kind of member of Congress, and look at unemployment, look at all kinds of other kinds of information, what employment patterns are, income patterns, and so on and so forth. And so you'll be able to see, is somebody voting to deregulate or to allow for more subprime lending when most of their residents are getting subprime mortgages, or being see credit card votes, and or folks having trouble getting credit cards in their district. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to pull together with census data for 2010.
don't have much to add, actually. I would refer you to the website of Andrew Beveridge, who is a professor at NYU, I believe. It might be CUNY. He works with us quite a bit and has a really, I think he's a piece of software called Social Explorer, which is a really fantastic piece of software to do mapping. It maps, it allows you to explore census data, I think going back many, many censuses. That's one census. I'm pretty sure he was involved. Yeah.
Time for one more question, perhaps over here. Again, yell. Yes, you.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. Yes, you.
Yeah, I want to get back to that, what you were talking about a little bit about the idea of protecting data and obfuscation. It was a big concern of mine in terms of the transparency. But I wonder if there's any conversations that people are having about data accountability that are on a more sustained way. This idea of throwing up data that's actually taking us backwards.
The question has to do with whether any discussions underway about data accountability to prevent people from doing just that.
And, we have that Defense Intelligence Agency example. There are other examples I know of. And I think that the accuracy of federal data, both in terms of just stupid mistakes and also in terms of cooking the books. We know that there are two separate, we know that, just to give another example, the House Appropriations Committee has a fantastic earmarks database. I've actually seen it, that they keep track of every member, what they're asking for, who's going to benefit and everything else, and they don't make that public. Instead, they have these kind of public disclosures with these, PDF documents, letters that you have to match to what's in the bill, and it's this long, complicated thing. But the question, are there two sets of books? Well, yes, I think the answer is certainly yes. And then, but where is this happening? What agencies is happening? We really don't know. And that's kind of what, my team is trying to look at with the secret data catalog, is to try to find out. And that's, one of our big concerns. And, you'll be hearing more about it from us. But yeah, it is a big concern.
Well, thank you all for coming, and let's thank our panelists one last time.